October 1941. The night sky above Moscow burns red. Searchlights sweep across the darkness, tracing silver beams through drifting snow. Anti-aircraft guns thunder from rooftops, their shells bursting like orange blossoms high above the Kremlin. Down below, civilians huddle in basements, clutching icons and children, while the ground trembles under the force of exploding bombs. Lieutenant Hans Keitel, a Luftwaffe pilot with the 4th Air Fleet, squints through his cockpit glass. His Junkers Ju-88 bomber hums steadily at 6,000 meters, the faint reflection of the Moscow River glinting below. There it is, he mutters into his radio. The city's burning again. From this height, Moscow looks like a constellation fallen to earth. Clusters of lights, long runways, flashes of artillery. Drop altitude to 5,000. His commander orders through the crackling receiver. Target sector north by northwest. Factories. Rail junctions. Keitel adjusts the controls. The bomber dips. Ahead, he can see what looks like an industrial complex. Hangars, chimneys, even moving trains. It's perfect. He gives the order. Bombs away. 5 seconds later, the earth below erupts in blossoms of fire. Direct hit, his navigator shouts. But Keitel frowns. The explosions look strange. Too clean. Too contained. He dismisses it. Fatigue, perhaps. The night fades behind him as the bomber turns home, unaware that the city he just destroyed was made of plywood, paint, and light bulbs. 3 months earlier, the Soviet capital had lived on a knife's edge. After Operation Barbarossa's launch in June 1941, the Wehrmacht had advanced across the western USSR with terrifying speed. Minsk, Smolensk, Kiev, all had fallen. By autumn, German tanks were less than 100 kilometers from Moscow. Civilians dug trenches in the parks. Stalin stayed in the Kremlin, refusing evacuation. At the same time, another war was being fought, one of illusion and survival. Inside a dimly lit office at the Moscow Architectural Institute, engineer Boris Iofin unrolled a large aerial map across the table. Around him sat an unlikely collection of artists, architects, electricians, and military engineers. "We can't stop the Luftwaffe from coming," Iofin said quietly. "But we can stop them from seeing." Someone scoffed. "What are you suggesting? We hide Moscow." "Yes," Iofin replied. "Exactly that." It sounded insane. But Soviet intelligence had intercepted reports. The Luftwaffe relied heavily on visual navigation. Rivers, roads, light grids, and the bright landmarks of the Kremlin and Red Square. If they could be tricked, perhaps Moscow could be spared. Thus began one of the most secret and audacious projects of the war, the creation of a false Moscow, a decoy city built from wood, wire, and deception. By late summer, construction crews moved into the forests north of the capital, near Mytishi and Khimki. Under strict NKVD guard, they began building what would become a ghost metropolis, a city of shadows. Workers erected entire blocks of fake houses using wooden frames and painted canvas roofs. Rail lines were laid from scrap steel. Factories were mimicked using plywood chimneys and oil drums. Even the airfields, complete with dummy aircraft, were sculpted from wood and straw, painted to resemble concrete under moonlight. At night, electricians installed hundreds of dim, flickering bulbs to simulate residential lighting. They studied Luftwaffe reconnaissance photographs to match the city's light grid exactly. On clear nights, one could stand on a hill and see Moscow glowing faintly in the distance, while the real capital remained cloaked in darkness. An engineer named Semyon Astakov later recalled, "We used rags, tin, even glass fragments to mimic reflections. The hardest part was movement. So, we built fake trains and moved them on short rails by hand. It was theater, only our audience was flying at 5,000 meters. The entire operation was classified under the code name Maskirovka, the Soviet doctrine of deception and camouflage. While German bombers hunted the lights, Moscow itself was disappearing beneath blackout curtains. The first real test came on October 21, 1941. Air raid sirens wailed as dozens of Heinkel He-111s and Junkers Ju-88s crossed the border. Anti-aircraft guns barked into the darkness. From the ground, it sounded like thunder rolling over steel. But to the German pilots, something seemed off. The familiar glint of the Moscow River appeared slightly displaced. The runways below gleamed under faint lights, lined with what looked like aircraft ready for takeoff. Target confirmed, came the radio call. Release pattern. And so, the Luftwaffe unleashed its fury, bombs cascading over the fake airfields, dummy factories, and wooden suburbs north of Moscow. In the real city, citizens could hear the distant rumble of explosions and cheered through tears. They believed the bombs had missed, not realizing that it was by design. By dawn, reconnaissance planes photographed miles of burning wreckage. German analysts noted heavy damage to Moscow's industrial districts. The deception had worked perfectly. Encouraged by success, Soviet engineers expanded their methods. Entire rivers were painted on frozen ground using oil and soot. Bridges were outlined in fake lights to lure bombers away. Even railway stations were replicated using cardboard facades that folded and unfolded depending on daylight. At one decoy airfield, they lit small bonfires inside barrels to simulate fuel storage. In another, trucks with covered headlights moved in circles to mimic planes taxiing before takeoff. To the Luftwaffe, Moscow appeared struck repeatedly, yet reconnaissance photos always showed the same targets burning, again and again. Confusion spread through German command. Why wasn't the Soviet capital collapsing? In Berlin, General Hans Jeschneck, the Luftwaffe's chief of staff, demanded new intelligence. He was told the truth. The Russians are hiding their cities. But by then, it was too late. The German army was bogged down in snow and mud outside the capital, and the Soviet winter counteroffensive was beginning. The wooden Moscow had bought precious time and saved countless lives. After the Battle of Moscow ended in early 1942, most of the decoy city's structures were dismantled. The plywood factories rotted in the thawing snow. The engineers returned to anonymity, their work never publicly acknowledged. It would take decades before details of the project surfaced. Only in the 1980s did Soviet historians confirm the existence of Maskirovka No. 1, the great decoy north of Moscow. Even then, few photos survived. One aerial image, declassified years later, shows what looks like a small town amid fields, rows of houses, geometric streets, and a perfect imitation of an airfield. The caption reads simply, "Training Zone, 1941. No medals, no headlines, just a quiet legacy of ingenuity and survival." For the men who built that phantom city, victory meant invisibility. Their greatest achievement was that no one ever saw it. As historian Viktor Suvorov would later write, while the world watched Moscow burn, it was a city of wood that took the fire. The Luftwaffe never learned the truth, that the capital they thought they bombed was only a stage set, a masterpiece of deception carved from pine and painted with light.